He didn't die in the accident. He was murdered.
My husband died suddenly, and the woman at his funeral hugged me like she knew me. At my husband's funeral, a mysterious woman keeps watching me. When she hugs me, she whispers something that shatters everything I believed about my marriage, forcing me to grieve him and the lies he left behind. When she hugged me, I felt like I was holding a stranger, and yet, somehow, someone who knew the corners of my heart I didn't even know existed. That's the moment it started. At my husband's funeral, standing in the quiet hum of whispered condolences, the soft rustle of black dresses, the faint smell of lilies and damp earth, she appeared. She didn't introduce herself, not with words. She didn't ask if I needed anything. She just came, walking across the grass like she had a purpose, her eyes locked on mine. And when she wrapped me in that hug, her whisper cut through the haze of grief. He wasn't the man you thought he was. I remember stepping back, almost stumbling, my hands shaking and my knees threatening to give out. Around us, people murmured prayers and shared memories. I could feel the warm summer sun on my face, the stiff folds of my dress against my skin, the weight of the casket's shadow looming behind me, and yet, it was her words that anchored me in a reality I wasn't ready to face. Before that day, life had been quiet, predictable, and safe. My husband, David, was 42, and though he wasn't perfect, he had always seemed reliable. The kind of man who never forgot to make coffee in the morning, who knew which fork to place where on the table, who remembered our anniversary with a card and flowers, never missing a beat. We lived in a small, sunlit house at the end of a cul-de-sac. The walls smelled faintly of vanilla candles and old books, the kind that collect dust and memories in the same quiet corners. The kitchen, with its white tiles and mismatched mugs, was where our mornings began. David would hum softly as he made toast, butter melting unevenly, coffee brewing with that familiar bitter scent that always made me smile. Our life wasn't glamorous. It wasn't filled with exotic vacations or extravagant gifts. But it was ours. My friends would tease me, say I had married the safe choice, but I didn't mind. I liked the rhythm, the predictability, the comfort of knowing that when I came home after work, he'd be there, leaning against the counter, smirking at my tiredness and handing me the first warm sip of coffee before even asking how my day had been. We were careful with our words, yes, but that wasn't the same as distance. Our small arguments, about dishes or the laundry left unfolded, or whether the thermostat should stay at 70 or 72, were fleeting. They never lingered. And the laughter, oh, it was always there, tucked between our shared silences, in the way he'd throw his head back when a joke landed just right, or in the secret grin we'd share over burnt toast. David's parents were gone, his sister lived across the country, and my parents had moved to a retirement community a few states away. Our circle was small, tight, and safe. Even our few friends knew that we were a pair who existed quietly in our corner of the world, unremarkable, stable, dependable. Maybe that's why, the shock of his death hit so brutally. One moment, he was laughing at some silly thing I had said about my day at the office. The next, a phone call in the middle of the night, a voice I didn't recognize telling me he was gone. A sudden, silent heart attack. No warning. No chance to say goodbye. At the funeral, I felt like I was moving through a dream I hadn't consented to. People talked around me, their voices muffled. The scent of roses and lilies mixed with something sharper, the antiseptic smell from the funeral home, or maybe it was just the hospital I was remembering. I could hear sobs, stifled and open, the scrape of shoes on polished floors, the faint rustle of programs. But the weight on my chest wasn't grief alone. Something else had crept in unease. It started subtly. A glance, a whisper I couldn't place, a shuffle of feet behind me. And then the hug. She smelled faintly of lavender, and something else I couldn't identify, a scent that clung to me in a strange, unsettling way. Her arms were firm but not harsh, steady, as if she'd done this many times before. And her voice, soft, almost reverent, whispered into my ear, "He wasn't the man you thought he was." My first instinct was shock, disbelief, a surge of protective anger. "Who are you?" I asked, pulling back slightly, trying to meet her eyes. She smiled, a gentle, knowing smile, and let go without a word. And then she melted back into the crowd like she had never been there, leaving me standing in the middle of a gathering I no longer felt a part of. The rest of the funeral passed in a haze. Words blurred together. Friends, neighbors, colleagues murmured condolences. Some cried openly. I answered automatically, murmuring thank yous, nodding along to the rehearsed sympathy that always comes in moments like this. But my mind kept circling back to her words, her presence. Something about her made the world seem simultaneously bigger and smaller, a reminder that what I knew about my husband, the man I had shared my life with, might have been a fraction of the truth. I remember sitting in my chair after the service, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm tea. The chapel smelled faintly of wood polish and candle smoke. The shadows of the pews stretched across the floor in long, unbroken lines. I kept expecting to see her again, to find her standing silently, watching me like she had at the beginning. But she was gone. And yet, that whisper, those words, echoed louder than any eulogy, louder than the prayers and songs that filled the room. As the day wore on, I replayed every moment I had shared with David. His smiles, his soft chuckle when I teased him, the way he held my hand when we walked down the street. I tried to reconcile the man I knew with the possibility of the man she hinted at. And the more I thought, the more a quiet, gnawing suspicion settled into my chest. Something had been hidden from me. Something significant. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew one thing for certain. My life, as I had understood it, was about to fracture. And somehow, the woman who hugged me, the stranger who knew too much, was the key to that fracture. Before I continue, let me ask you something, my besties. Where are you listening from today? Here in the UK, the US, or somewhere else? And as you listen, I want you to tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. This is Voice of Mrs. Addison, and this story is not easy to tell, but it's an honest one. The days after the funeral were the kind that feel endless but pass in a blur. I moved through the house like a ghost, touching everything as if by remembering it, I could anchor myself to a life that had been ripped away. His shaving kit was still on the sink, the smell of his aftershave faint but unmistakable. His favorite mug sat in the dishwasher, abandoned, a stubborn reminder of routines I no longer had. And yet something gnawed at me. It wasn't the grief alone, though that was heavy enough. It was the memory of her, the woman at the funeral, the one who had hugged me, whispered, and vanished without a trace. I couldn't shake the sensation that she knew more than she should. And with that knowledge came questions I wasn't ready to ask, but that wouldn't leave me in peace. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Perhaps she was a friend of the family. I didn't know. Maybe she was a distant cousin. But even as I told myself these things, my mind traced David's life with painstaking care, scrutinizing every memory, every moment, every smile. I began noticing small, odd things I had overlooked before. The first clue came from his phone. I had avoided it for days, leaving it untouched on the kitchen counter like a forbidden artifact. But one evening, driven by a restless insomnia, I picked it up. A password prompt stared back at me. My fingers shook. It wasn't that I wanted to invade his privacy. I wanted answers. I needed reassurance. Maybe it was the comfort of certainty I craved, a tether to the man I thought I knew. The password was surprisingly simple. Not a complex string of letters and numbers, just David 123. Almost childlike. I hesitated, then swiped in. The messages hit me first. Casual at first, jokes with friends, harmless banter, and then a series of texts from a woman I didn't recognize. Her name was Rebecca. Her words were warm, affectionate, almost intimate. Can't wait to see you tonight, one read. I missed you today, another. And then it escalated. There were photos, selfies of her, sometimes with him, sometimes alone, pictures he had sent her back, always with that same secretive smile he wore when he didn't want anyone else to see. I closed the phone, my chest tight, my stomach twisting. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Maybe I didn't understand context, but a quiet, sinking feeling told me this wasn't casual. This wasn't friendship. And yet, my brain refused to fully acknowledge the truth. It wanted to protect me from the reality I feared, that my husband had another life, another woman, someone I had never known. Sleep became impossible. I replayed conversations in my head, searching for hidden meanings, subtle slips I hadn't noticed before. The way he sometimes lingered on his phone a little too long. The excuses for late nights at the office. The way he always seemed just a little too careful with his words, like he was rehearsing them before speaking. I had dismissed these things as trivial at the time. Now, they screamed at me with the clarity of hindsight. Then came the letters. Not many, just a handful slipped between the pages of his old journals. Notes she had written him, small, folded neatly, words carefully chosen. I can't wait to see you again. Things feel so right with us. Don't let anyone know. I remember sitting on our bed, holding one of the letters in trembling hands, feeling like the floor had dropped beneath me. How could I not have seen it? How could the man I loved, the man I trusted completely, be living a double life? The grief that had weighed on me moments ago now intertwined with a sharp, burning betrayal. My eyes stung with tears, and I let them fall freely. For the first time, I realized my grief would never be uncomplicated. It would carry the weight of deceit, the ghost of a life I didn't know. I tried to talk to someone, my sister-in-law, my best friend, anyone who would listen, but the words caught in my throat. How could I explain that the woman who had hugged me at the funeral might be the key to a secret I hadn't suspected? And even if I could, would anyone believe me? After all, she had vanished without a trace, and my husband was gone forever. Who would take a widow seriously when grief made her question reality? And yet, the universe has a way of forcing the truth into the open, whether you're ready or not. A week later, I went back to the funeral home to pick up some personal items we had left behind. I didn't expect to see her again, but there she was, standing near the front doors, waiting. She looked different in daylight, her hair pulled back, her expression softer but no less knowing. And when she saw me, she didn't hesitate. She crossed the lobby, the click of her heels echoing on the marble floor, and before I could stop her, she hugged me again. "You need to know," she whispered, her voice calm, measured. "You deserve the truth. He wasn't the man you believed. Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" She pulled back slightly, looking at me with eyes that seemed to see straight through the mask I wore for the world. "Because someone has to tell you," she said. "And because I couldn't stand by while you suffered in ignorance. He loved someone else. And it wasn't just a mistake, it was a pattern. You need to know, before you grieve in silence forever." The words hit me like a wave. My hands gripped the edges of the counter behind me. My vision blurred with tears I couldn't stop. I wanted to run, to hide, to deny every syllable. But deep down, I knew she was telling the truth. That gnawing feeling I had ignored, it wasn't paranoia. It was intuition, honed by the subtle evidence he had left behind. She gave me a small envelope, folded carefully, almost ceremoniously. "Open it when you're ready," she said. And then she turned, leaving me alone in the quiet lobby, the weight of what she had given me heavier than any coffin I had ever seen. I held the envelope in my hands long after she had gone, my mind spinning. Inside were photographs, letters, receipts, proof of everything she had whispered. The reality of my marriage, the life I had thought I knew, was unraveling in a way I couldn't stop. That night, I sat on the floor of our bedroom, the envelope open beside me. I touched each photograph, each note, as if the texture of paper could somehow help me understand the texture of my own life, the edges frayed by lies I hadn't imagined. My home, once a sanctuary, felt alien. Every memory with David now carried a shadow. Every laugh, every tender gesture, every "I love you" was now tinged with doubt. And yet, amid the heartbreak, I felt something else, a flicker of clarity. A realization that grief was no longer just about losing him, It was about reclaiming myself, my truth, my ability to live in a world that hadn't been entirely honest with me. I didn't know what I would do next. Confrontation? Silence? Investigation? I only knew that I couldn't move forward without understanding everything. And that woman, the stranger who hugged me twice, who seemed to know more about my husband than I ever could, had just become the most important person in my journey toward that truth. I spent that night turning over every piece of evidence she had left me. The photographs were the first blow. David, smiling in the sunlight of a cafe, holding hands with Rebecca as though the world had always belonged to just the two of them. Another picture, them laughing, her head resting lightly on his shoulder, the same smile he gave me when he said, "I love you." My stomach dropped, my hands trembling so badly, I nearly dropped the photos. And then there were the letters. Words I had never imagined reading in my life, words meant to be hidden, meant to be secret. "I can't wait for our weekend away," one read. Another, "You make me feel alive in a way I never did with her." And her, that meant me. Me. The woman he had promised forever to. I sat in the dark of our bedroom. The envelope's contents spread around me like shards of glass. Every memory I had shared with him was now refracted, a kaleidoscope of truth and lies that stung in the softest, most intimate parts of my heart. I could almost hear his voice, feel his hands, smell the faint cologne he wore to bed, all now tinged with the betrayal I had never anticipated. The next morning, I didn't speak to anyone. I avoided calls, texts, even friends who wanted to check in. I couldn't talk. I couldn't explain. Even saying his name aloud made my throat close, my chest tighten, my hands curl into fists against my knees. And yet, the ache was married to a compulsion I couldn't ignore. I needed answers. I went through her home office, combing through bills, bank statements, and emails. Every routine transaction revealed small, strange anomalies. Weekend getaways he had told me were business trips, fine dining reservations I had never known about, small payments made to hotels and restaurants I had never heard of. I realized with horror that his double life wasn't just emotional, it was logistical, methodical, deliberate. And then came the confrontation I had dreaded, yet somehow knew was inevitable. I called the woman from the funeral, Rebecca. Her number was on a slip tucked in the envelope. I remember my fingers trembling, the phone shaking against my ear, the words threatening to betray me before I could even speak. "Hello." Her voice was calm, measured, almost eerily so. It's me," I said. I know." There was a pause. Just a single, pregnant pause. "Then, I figured you would." Her tone wasn't cruel, not really. It was just factual, matter of fact, like she was reading a case file, and I was the subject. "I trusted him," I whispered, barely audible. I loved him. "And you knew." "I didn't know," she said softly. "I didn't know the kind of life you shared, the vows, the home, the routines. I only knew him in moments outside of you. I loved him, yes, but I didn't think I was hurting anyone. I never thought he would die and leave this." Her voice trailed off. I felt a strange mix of anger, despair, and pity. "You knew more than anyone else at the funeral," I said. "You hugged me. You whispered it."
"Why?"
"Why now?" "Because no one else would tell you," she said. "I couldn't let you continue to grieve blindly, thinking he was what he pretended to be. He wasn't. And you deserve the truth, even if it shatters you." Her honesty was a blade. Sharp, clean, unavoidable. I hung up and sat back, my body sagging, my eyes stinging, my chest heaving. I had spent years trusting the wrong person completely, believing in a marriage that was only half real. And now, I had the full view, and it was terrifying. I remember walking through the house after that, each room a silent witness to my grief and betrayal. The kitchen, where we had eaten breakfast together every morning, felt too small, too confined. The living room, where we had laughed over movies, seemed too bright, too empty. Even the bedroom, where I had felt safe in his arms, now carried a residue of lies that made sleep impossible. I thought about all the conversations we had, the laughter, the intimacy. And for every happy memory, there was now a shadow, A hidden lie, a deception, a betrayal that had been carefully woven into the fabric of our lives. But amid the devastation, a quiet voice inside me began to speak. Not a voice of revenge, not a voice of hatred, but one of clarity. You deserve better than this. You deserve the truth. And now you have it. I realized that grief was no longer the only emotion I needed to navigate. There was something else I had to face. The anger, the sorrow, the betrayal, all tangled together. And I knew I couldn't do it alone. I reached out to a few trusted friends, people who could help me process without judgment, without pity. It was difficult. Every word was a reminder of everything I had lost and everything I hadn't known. But sharing it made the weight slightly more bearable. In the following days, I made a choice. I would confront the life David had hidden from me, not with screaming or vengeance, but with clarity and resolve. I would learn everything, uncover every detail, and ensure that his deception could no longer control my grief. And that led me back to Rebecca. The second time we met, it was in a quiet cafe, neutral territory. She didn't wear the perfume I remembered from the funeral. She sat across from me, hands folded, eyes steady. And for the first time, I saw her not as an antagonist, but as another woman caught in the same web of human frailty, trying to navigate the consequences of loving a man who is capable of lying with such precision. I want to know everything, I said, my voice calm but firm. Every trip, every lie, every detail. Not because I want to punish you, but because I need to understand. I need to grieve properly, and I can't do that with shadows hanging over me. She nodded, silently agreeing. And for hours, she told me stories. Stories that revealed a side of David I had never imagined. Small gestures, intimate moments, the things he had said that had never reached my ears. And with each story, my heartbreak deepened, but so did my understanding. The man I had loved, the man I had thought I knew, had been real in fragments, but in truth, he had also been someone else entirely. That day, I cried. I shook. I laughed bitterly at the absurdity of it all. But I also felt a strange sense of liberation. Knowledge, painful as it was, brought power. And with power came the first whisper of healing. After that long, exhausting conversation with Rebecca, I realized something essential. I couldn't stay passive. I had spent the first days after David's death in a fog, letting grief and shock dictate my every move. But now, armed with knowledge, I felt a shift, a faint, stubborn spark of agency. I had to do something, not out of spite, not for revenge, but to reclaim my life and my peace. The first step was understanding the full scope of his deception. I asked Rebecca to help me piece it together, the trips, the late-night calls, the secret dinners. And slowly, painfully, the pattern emerged. David had kept two lives running side by side, and while neither woman was entirely innocent, it was clear where responsibility lay. The man I had loved had chosen secrecy, manipulation, and lies. But action required more than just knowledge. It required careful thought. I knew I couldn't explode at the funeral attendees or his coworkers, not yet. I had to be strategic. I wanted the truth to be known, yes, but in a way that preserved my dignity and allowed me to grieve without being swallowed by anger. I began documenting everything. Receipts, letters, photos, even the small things he had tried to hide in plain sight. Each piece felt like a brick in a wall I was building around myself, a barrier between my life and the chaos he had left behind. I made folders, took notes, cross-referenced dates. I wasn't trying to shame him, he was gone, after all, but I needed the clarity that only structure could provide. One evening, while sifting through emails and messages, I realized something. There had been small gestures of care, moments where he had tried to balance his lies with the life he shared with me. He had paid off bills on time, maintained routines, never raised suspicion in the mundane parts of life. And as much as this knowledge angered me, it also helped me understand him, the man he had been, and the man he hadn't been capable of becoming. The next step was confronting the social circle we shared. Friends, coworkers, and family deserved to know at least part of the truth, though selectively. I started with the people closest to us, a couple of neighbors, a trusted friend who had been a part of our life long before Rebecca ever appeared. I wanted them to understand the nuances, that David had been loving in parts, but also deceptive. That my grief was genuine, but it was intertwined with betrayal I had to navigate. When I told them, the reactions were mixed. Some were shocked, some skeptical, some quietly nodded, as if they had sensed it all along. But no one judged me. That, in itself, was a revelation. The world didn't fall apart when the truth came out. People could handle complexity, and I could, too. Meanwhile, Rebecca and I continued our cautious, deliberate alliance. We weren't friends, not yet, but we shared a bond forged in grief, betrayal, and the pursuit of truth. We met occasionally, piecing together David's life outside our shared world. Each encounter was bittersweet, filled with a strange mix of anger, curiosity, and even a fleeting empathy for the man who had been at the center of it all. I also began confronting my own grief directly. I realized that running from the betrayal or letting it define me wasn't an option. So I journaled, long into the night, spilling tears onto paper, letting anger carve words across the page. I walked, sometimes for hours, feeling the sun on my face, the wind tugging at my hair, grounding me in the present. I cooked for myself, went to the park, called old friends, did small things that reminded me I still existed beyond the shadow of his deception. One of the hardest moments came when I finally returned to our bedroom, the room we had shared for years. I opened drawers, rearranged items, touched objects that carried memories, and let myself feel the duality of it all, love intertwined with lies. For the first time since his death, I slept there without feeling suffocated by grief. And in that sleep, I realized something crucial. My life was no longer his story. It belonged to me. Then came the moral confrontation I had been preparing for, not to shame David, not to confront Rebecca in anger, but to set boundaries and ensure the truth was honored. I reached out to close family members, gently sharing the evidence of his betrayal, carefully explaining the emotional landscape without sensationalism. My goal wasn't to destroy reputations. It was to reclaim clarity and ensure that those who mattered knew what I had endured. It wasn't easy. Some family members couldn't reconcile the David they knew with the man I described. Some refused to believe that a person could lead such a double life. And others, quietly, had suspected, had seen glimmers but lacked proof. In those moments, I realized that human perception is fragile, often shaped more by desire than by truth. And yet, I stayed calm, collected, and factual. I didn't shout. I didn't wail. I simply told the story as it was, as painful and as necessary. Through all this, a subtle but profound shift happened inside me. I began to notice my own strength. The grief was still there, the hollow ache that came with missing a life shared, but it was no longer paralyzing. The betrayal burned, yes, but it also illuminated a new path, a path where I could grieve, learn, and eventually reclaim joy. And then, unexpectedly, I found a sense of moral clarity. Betrayal is heavy, but it also teaches. It exposes truth, and in that exposure, it offers the chance to grow, to rebuild, to redefine life on your own terms. I realized that in reclaiming my story, I was honoring not just the woman I had been, but the woman I could become. I took one last walk through the house where he had lived, touching objects lightly, saying goodbye in a way that felt honest, unfiltered. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel the faintest trace of freedom, as if the weight of deception had lifted slightly, leaving space for air, for light, for something resembling hope. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly. A few friends and neighbors had begun to notice the subtle cracks in the life David had left behind. Some had seen the evidence I had carefully shared. Others had sensed the tension in my voice during conversations or the slight edge in my calm explanations. And then, one evening, it began to spread more broadly. I was at a small community gathering, a charity dinner we had attended as a couple every year. I had been hesitant to go, knowing how many people there would be who had only known David's public self. But I went anyway, determined to live in the world without fear, to reclaim my place in it. As I entered, polite smiles greeted me. People expressed condolences again, shaking my hand, murmuring sympathetic words. And then a few familiar faces pulled me aside. One of David's old colleagues, a woman I barely knew, approached gently. "I heard," she said, hesitating, "about everything. I'm so sorry. I can't imagine how you felt." Her words were different from the rehearsed condolences at the funeral. They carried weight, an acknowledgement of truth. And as the night wore on, more people approached. Some were curious, some were sympathetic, and some were quietly judgmental, though never toward me, only toward the double life David had led. The truth, once confined to private envelopes and whisper confessions, had begun to shape the narrative around him. And while some sought scandal, most simply wanted to understand. I explained calmly, factually, without dramatics. I didn't vilify him. I told the story of a man who had been both loving and deceitful, a man whose choices had consequences that extended far beyond his own life. It was strange the way people responded. Some were shocked, yes, but many nodded, as if recognizing the complex humanity of betrayal. They didn't seek to punish me for my grief, nor to exploit my pain for gossip. They simply absorbed it, the same way one might absorb a difficult truth about the world, reluctantly but with acknowledgement. And then there was Rebecca. Once word had begun to spread, she approached me again. This time, we met openly, in a quiet park near the edge of town. There were no whispers, no secretive glances, only two women who had been touched by the same man, both grappling with grief and betrayal. "I never wanted this public," she said, her voice soft. "But the truth has a way of coming out. People deserve to know, and you deserve peace." "I've realized something," I said, taking a deep breath. "The truth isn't just about revealing the lies he told. It's about reclaiming my life from them. It's about showing that even when someone betrays you, you can still hold your dignity, your clarity, and your strength." She nodded, and in that quiet moment, I felt something shift. There was no lingering malice between us, only the shared understanding of human imperfection. She hadn't caused his betrayal, he had. And while her presence had complicated my grief, it had also illuminated it, forcing me to confront the full spectrum of my loss. In the weeks that followed, life slowly began to reassert itself. Friends who had been tentative in their interactions grew closer, offering quiet support. Neighbors who had only smiled politely now spoke candidly, acknowledging the reality of what had happened. Even casual acquaintances approached with empathy rather than judgment. And in this ripple of awareness, the social consequences for David's hidden life became evident. People began to see his choices clearly, separate from the man I had loved. There were quiet lessons embedded in the fallout, the importance of honesty, the consequences of secrecy, and the enduring impact of betrayal. I watched as his reputation, carefully curated in life, shifted, not because I sought revenge, but because truth has a way of asserting itself naturally. I also took steps to protect myself financially and emotionally. I consulted advisors about shared accounts and property. I documented everything thoroughly, ensuring that the remnants of his secret life couldn't destabilize my future. I realized that while I couldn't change the past, I could safeguard the present and future. Through it all, I discovered something unexpected, a new sense of confidence. I could walk into rooms without fear, speak my truth without hesitation, and grieve openly without shame. I realized that the weight of his deception had been heavy, but it had also taught me resilience, clarity, and moral courage. By the time the one-year anniversary of his death arrived, I had transformed the way I existed in my own life. The home that once felt like a mausoleum of memories now carried warmth again, though different warmth, self-sufficient, mindful, resilient. Friends visited. Laughter returned to the kitchen, and I even hosted small gatherings in our living room, consciously creating new memories amidst the old. Rebecca remained a cautious presence in my life. Not a friend in the conventional sense, but an honest witness to the complexity of our shared grief. We had a mutual understanding, No illusions, no secrets, only honesty. And that, more than anything, allowed me to find closure without bitterness. I also reflected often on the subtle power of truth. The whispers at the funeral, the courage to confront reality, and the decision to handle the fallout with dignity taught me that even in the darkest moments, one can assert control over their narrative. And in doing so, one can create space for healing, understanding, and eventual peace. Most importantly, I learned that betrayal doesn't have to define you. It can teach you boundaries, self-respect, and the importance of clarity. You can grieve fully and honestly while reclaiming your life, and that reclamation is a form of justice in itself. Healing didn't come all at once. There were mornings when I woke with a tightness in my chest, a lingering ache where love and betrayal had collided. Some days, I would catch a scent, his cologne, faint and familiar, and my stomach would twist, my mind instantly transported back to the life I thought I knew. But gradually, with intention and patience, the sharp edges of grief softened. I started small, making my own breakfast without the weight of absent hands beside me, walking in the park without feeling watched by shadows of what could have been. Each small step was an act of reclamation, proof that my life could move forward even in the aftermath of deception. I focused on the things that had always grounded me, the routines I had enjoyed before David's secrets complicated everything. I returned to my old hobbies, long-neglected books, quiet evenings writing in my journal. I laughed more freely, sometimes in the kitchen over burnt toast or in the living room at a television show I loved, no longer feeling guilty for allowing myself joy. I also made intentional space for reflection. I journaled extensively, writing letters I would never send, to David, to Rebecca, to the life we had built together. Through writing, I gave voice to the anger, the sorrow, and even the lingering love that had not entirely disappeared. It was messy and painful, but each word released a little more weight from my shoulders. Rebecca and I maintained our cautious, honest connection. We never pretended the past didn't exist, nor did we try to erase the pain. But sharing those difficult truths, acknowledging the human complexities that led to betrayal, gave me clarity. In a strange, fragile way, it helped me forgive, not her, not David, but the situation itself. Forgiveness wasn't absolution, it was freedom. And I realized that freedom was the cornerstone of my healing. I began reconnecting with friends and family on a deeper level. Conversations became real again, unfiltered by fear or grief. People who had witnessed my loss and my journey now interacted with me as a woman who had been tested and had endured, not as a fragile widow defined by her husband's absence. I felt the warmth of genuine support, and I learned to accept it without shame. Work also became a refuge. I threw myself into projects with renewed focus, finding satisfaction in accomplishments that were entirely my own. My career, once routine, now felt like a space of autonomy, a reminder that I could create meaning and stability without reliance on someone else's choices or loyalty. There were quiet moments that carried the deepest revelations. Sitting on the porch at dusk, the sky painted in soft oranges and purples, I felt the slow, steady rhythm of life returning. I could breathe fully again, without the weight of secrets pressing against me. I learned to trust my instincts, to listen to the quiet voice inside that had warned me from the very beginning. That voice had guided me through grief and deception, and now it guided me toward peace. Most of all, I learned about resilience, about the strength it takes to face unbearable truths and yet remain kind, composed, and self-directed, about the power of knowing your own worth, even when someone you loved deeply had tried to conceal parts of themselves that changed everything. I realized that betrayal doesn't erase the love you gave, but it does demand that you rebuild your foundation with honesty, clarity, and courage. One afternoon, while sipping tea and reflecting on the journey, I allowed myself to smile genuinely. Not the polite, rehearsed smiles of social interactions, but the deep, unguarded smile of someone who has survived heartbreak, faced deception, and still found life worth embracing. I thought about the lessons I had learned, the importance of truth, the courage to confront it, the grace to move forward. And in that quiet, private moment, I felt a profound sense of closure. I also realized that my story, though painful, might help others. That by sharing my experience, I could offer guidance to someone trapped in confusion, grief, or betrayal. And perhaps, just perhaps, it could prevent them from suffering in silence the way I almost had. Through everything, the loss, the shock, the confrontation, the rebuilding, I had discovered a truth I would carry forward. Life continues, even when trust is broken. Love can exist alongside disappointment. Strength is born in the unlikeliest of places, and healing, though slow, is always possible. I began to plan for the future, not with David in it, but with myself fully present. Small trips, simple celebrations, quiet moments of joy that I had long deferred. I embraced life again, not as a continuation of what had been, but as the start of something entirely my own. And in that start, I found peace. Not the easy peace of forgetting, but the strong, enduring peace of understanding, of reclaiming my story, and of walking forward with dignity and grace.